Our reading this morning is drawn from Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering, and these are 3 excerpts from that book that I've strung together. Why do we gather? We gather to solve problems that we can't solve on our own. We gather to celebrate, to mourn, and to mark transitions. We gather to make decisions. We gather because we need one another. We gather to show strength. We gather to honor and acknowledge. We gather to build companies and schools and neighborhoods. We gather to welcome and to say goodbye. But here's the great paradox of gathering. There are so many good reasons for coming together that often we don't know precisely why we're doing so. The test for a meaningful reason for coming together: does it stick its neck out a little bit? Does it take a stand? Is it willing to unsettle some of the guests or maybe the host? Does it refuse to be everything to everyone? When you skip asking yourself what the purpose of your gathering is, you forsake an opportunity for your gathering to be a source of growth, support, guidance, and inspiration, tailored to the time in which you and others find yourselves. You squander a chance for your gathering to help and not just amuse you and others. I'm not sure how many people know it or if I've mentioned it before, but I grew up in the South. And growing up in the South in a church-going family, Sundays were a bit of a production. The production began at home, where as a child, my outfits, my hairstyling, and my accessories had to meet with my mother's exacting approval. I remember being told growing up that we needed to look our best for God, which apparently for my mother involved wearing pantyhose and curling her hair with a set of hot curlers, which would probably not be manufactured today due to fire concerns. And it seemed to my younger self that it was a struggle for my mom to get ready every Sunday, because every Sunday, like clockwork, we had a routine and a ritual for getting out the door. My father, dressed in his Sunday suit and tie, would saunter casually out the door to start warming up the car. And I would follow soon after, dutifully taking my place in the back seat, and we would commence our wait. My father and I understood each other in that I think we both wanted to enjoy the quiet and the calm of that time in the car before we really got into the hustle and bustle of Sunday morning. And from time to time, we would also engage in a little game of, how many minutes do you think it will be before Mom gets here? Inevitably, my mother would come down the stairs, huffing and puffing her way into the car. And as a child, I was certain I would never have to huff or puff my way anywhere. And now, at the very old age of 35, I can admit I was wrong about that. I huff and puff a lot of places. So my mom would pour herself into the car, hair curled, pantyhose on, and we would set off on our way to church. But the production did not end there. I suspect most other families in our church were engaged in a similar costuming and makeup ritual. And when we got to church, pleasantries would be exchanged. Always pleasantries, at least at first, no matter what you were going through or what you knew someone else was going through. Because grief and more difficult subject matter was generally for the prayer chain or a phone conversation or a weekday Bible study. Maybe there was some unwritten rule about pleasantries being the conversational currency of choice, because the sermons were rarely joyful and were almost always focused on the thrilling topic of sin, which I know is a favorite for most of us. And there were more unwritten rules to our service. No one swayed their bodies to the hymns. No one said amen or otherwise exclaimed in response to what the minister or other leaders said. And I, at least, was given a very strict set of stage instructions. Esther, when you are in the service, you do not rustle papers or whisper or wiggle around too much. You must be on your best behavior to not be a distraction to others during the service. And there was an unsaid, like some other children, heavily implied at the end. And I suspect some of those other children were given similar instructions and simply chose to disregard them. More power to them. The point that I'm coming to in recounting all of this was that there was a social script at play on Sunday mornings, and a very powerful one at that. The script directed us to be unfailingly positive, to dress and look a certain way, to act in specific ways. And I'd love to say that if someone had deviated from that script, they would have been welcomed in our church. But if I'm being honest, I think everyone of all genders would have gossiped about them, at least a little. And I know from personal experience how lonely it was to feel like there were parts of myself that didn't fit that script, parts that I had to hide or bury or disguise well enough to get by without anyone noticing, lest I be judged for it. Now you may be thinking, well, I'm glad our church doesn't have those problems. And I agree with you. I'm not here every week, but I know you well enough to say with confidence, I don't think this church has all of those problems. It's hard to feel the pressure to look your best for God in a non-creedal faith that doesn't ask you to believe in God. It's more difficult to feel like you can't express grief in a service that has a time set aside very explicitly for sharing joys and sorrows. And I still think it's useful for us to ask what social scripts are at play on Sunday mornings in our congregation, in this congregation. Every UU church I've ever been to does have certain unspoken rules of that particular congregation at play. Some of the ones I've run into over the years are: we welcome people of all beliefs, except if you believe in God. We don't really talk about God in this congregation because when we do, people get a little upset. We don't want to hear about politics from the pulpit. This is church, and we come to hear about spiritual stuff. The reverse of that, we don't want to hear about all that spiritual stuff from the pulpit. That's for other churches. We're UU, so the sermon should really be a revolutionary speech each week. We love children. We just don't really have that much for them to do when they're here. We love young people. When they show up, we immediately descend on them and list off all the ways they can get involved in the church because we're so excited they're here, to the point that sometimes it seems like we're more interested in what committees they can join than we are in meeting their spiritual needs. And finally, we love older people, but we don't really talk about aging or what it looks like to meet the needs of an aging congregation, or how we age and even die with dignity. You get the idea. Maybe some of these scripts are familiar and maybe none of them are. What I'm trying to get at are the ways in which our worship design, which includes these social scripts that we enact each week, the ways that design of our worship creates or stifles belonging in our congregations. Let me ask another question. Do you feel like you belong here? Do you feel like you belong here? And if so, why? I would love to hear some answers to this one, so don't be shy. Why do you feel like you belong here?
I feel that the community is open. I feel they're accepting.
Open, accepted, and welcome here. I love that.
I feel different from everybody, and wherever I go, I feel a pressure of conformity everywhere else up here.
Oh, that's beautiful. You feel different from everyone, and there's a pressure of conformity everywhere else but here. Anything else? Yeah, Thomas.
I feel safe here to practice things that aren't part of my regular routine.
Safe here to practice things that aren't part of your regular routine. That's beautiful. There is a twin to that question. One that may be emotionally harder to answer, and I won't ask you to answer this one out loud. Are there parts of you that struggle to belong here, or that you think don't belong here? And why is that? Again, you don't have to answer that one out loud. It can be difficult to bring 100% of ourselves anywhere we go. And I don't think any congregation of any religion out there is getting a perfect score at everyone feeling belonging all the time. I'm not sure that's possible, or even that it's what we should aim for. But I do think we should be aiming to provide a space where we feel comfortable practicing vulnerability and showing up as authentically as we can, sharing the pieces of ourselves that require trust and the love of community to live out publicly. I think we need to risk showing up to worship that can invite comfort and discomfort, stability and growth, to hear sermons that are political and spiritual, and to grapple with what it means to welcome people with many different theological leanings into a shared space of worship, to bring our vulnerabilities and our strengths into this shared, beloved space. So I want to offer 3 questions this morning as we consider maybe how to disrupt some of the scripts that we take for granted that just happen on Sunday mornings. The first question helps define our purpose. It's one I learned from Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering, and it is, why do we gather? Parker writes that the first step in convening people meaningfully is committing to a bold purpose. She emphasizes that before any gathering, hosts should ask ourselves, why is this gathering different from other gatherings? Why is it different from other people's gatherings of the same general type? What is this that other gatherings aren't? I think all UU congregations would benefit from asking, what is our bold purpose for worship? Why is our worship different from other worship, even other UU services? What is our worship service that other worship services aren't? This may seem to you like either a simple question or a really big one. But I think to define a purpose for worship means by necessity deciding that worship is not going to be all things to all people. In The Art of Gathering, Priya Parker reiterates that narrowing the purpose of a gathering is in fact one of the keys to making it sparkle in the long term. That by setting some boundaries and structure, we can free ourselves up to play a little bit more freely and try out bigger and bolder ideas. And that leads us into the second question, which helps us build our community. This question is woven throughout The Art of Gathering, and it's one I've learned myself from experience. Who do we want to find belonging here? I've been in many UU congregations and other progressive spaces that proudly proclaim, we welcome everyone. You are welcome here no matter who you are or what you believe. And I think I know what is meant by that. It's a broad attempt at welcoming people from many diverse backgrounds, which I agree with. But I always think to myself, do we really want to welcome everyone? Is everyone really welcome here no matter what they believe? Because if that's true, the gathering actually becomes unsafe for me and for many groups of people. Paradoxically, declaring too broad a welcome can create unbelonging. Most congregations and progressive spaces I've been a part of don't actually want, say, members of white supremacist hate groups to show up and start participating in our spaces. And if asked directly, we can easily declare that is not the crowd we want here. But I think sometimes in worrying about offending some folks that we think we might be able to hook in and kind of get to worship, or even offending people more broadly in our current political climate, we can become afraid to declare that we do covenant around shared values. Those values are love, interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. Priya Parker writes, "Here is what the skilled gatherer must know. In trying not to offend, you fail to protect the gathering itself and the people in it." Given the week we've just had, I want to say, this doesn't mean we need to be cruel to someone who shows up to our spaces with different beliefs or questioning their beliefs. But I'm saying that our beliefs, our shared values, need to mean something at the end of the day. That it matters that we make agreements with each other about how we will be together and what values we will hold in common, and that we're not afraid to hold each other and our guests to those agreements. So the question remains, who do we want to gather with? And if there are groups of people we want to welcome into our worship who are not currently represented, what shifts do we need to make in order to be a welcoming space for them? The third and the final question helps us attune more deeply. Once we've defined why we are gathering and who it is we want to gather with, we can ask, how is our worship design facilitating a sense of belonging? Well, right now, clearly someone belongs. Welcome, Worship Cat.
That was planned.
We planned that together. We can get really deep into the nitty-gritty of this one. We could conduct a review of every element of the worship service, from our experiences driving in the parking lot to leaving lunch. But for now, I'll just say that I encourage you to spend time as a congregation discussing how each element of worship does or does not bring about the sense of belonging that you want to create in this gathering on Sundays. You can do this in focus groups or at a workshop or with a survey. There's lots of possibilities. But I really encourage you to consider and invite the perspectives of different groups, especially marginalized groups. And within those marginalized groups, especially people of color, children, disabled people, and neurodivergent people. These groups, in my experience, are the ones most frequently left out of conversations about congregational belonging and worship design. So you can ask, what scripts are at play for us, individually and collectively, when we gather here? Do we want to keep those scripts in play or change them up? Why do we gather? Who do we want to gather with? And how is our worship design facilitating a sense of belonging in our community? In closing, I want to offer us one final quote from Priya Parker. She says, "A social contract for gathering answers this question: what am I willing to give, physically, psychologically, financially, emotionally, and otherwise, in return for what I expect to receive?" So I ask us, what are we willing to give? Physically, psychologically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, in order to co-create a space of belonging at this fellowship. Let us bless each other with our gifts, now and always. Amen, Selah, blessed be, may it be so, and thank you, Worship Cat.